Yes, friends and fellow daemons, I am doing a car video. I never really thought much about all the car videos that I see or why people decide to do their videos in a car, but I think I understand now why. It's because you get early to an appointment and you've got nothing else to do. So you're like, hey, I'll make a video. So once you get over that, you know, people walking around. Once you get over that, people, what are they doing? People walking around and wondering if they're gonna come up to you or knock on the window or something like that. Yeah, I don't know what they're doing back there. I was right there. I don't know. I had some stuff on my mind though, because I uploaded my last video and was reviewing it, and a couple of things occurred to me right away. The first one is the sun. In that video I said that the sun rotates, and I didn't mean that. I know the sun doesn't rotate around the earth. I know people are going to respond. Maybe after this video, like, you know, months from now ends up on YouTube, people will respond and call me a flat earther. But I do believe that the earth is round. And the sun does not rotate around the earth rotates around the sun. But what I meant about that, the cycle of the rotation of earth around the sun can be considered a breath. And some people talk about this as the daytime represents the exhalation of the sun, and the night represents an inhalation of the sun. And you can compare the presence of oxygen in the atmosphere during the day, with plants emitting oxygen and a day, and then eating up oxygen at night, as a reference to that. But again, the whole concept of an idea of breaths is intended to help us understand the significance of scale in things, how things happen on different scales, and understand the scale on which I act can have reverberations on larger scales and can be a representation of a similar act that happens on a larger scale. The other thing I wanted to talk about has to do with meat and diet. The question of diet that came up on that was mentioned on the last podcast, and that came up in the conversations with JJ Semple. During the conversation with JJ, I had referred to the story about how Gopi Krishna, after as a part of one of the negative effects that he experienced from his Kundalini awakening, he learned eventually that if he ate meat, it resolved it. Adding meat back into his diet resolved it. And I realized when I had talked about it with JJ, and I talked about it with him off screen as well, and that he was a little bit confused. He remembered that, but he seemed a little bit confused about it. And I went back and, well, I've been reading Gopi Krishna's book, Living with Kundalini. And what I had read before is the book Kundalini, an Evolutionary Force in Man, and that is the book that I had originally read the story about his experience with meat in. And what I've realized now, what I understand now, is that book, Evolutionary Force in Man, is a paring down, is an edited version of Living with Kundalini. Because Kundalini is larger. It's officially, it's Gopi Krishna's autobiography, where he just writes about everything that happened to him, and so they took out things that they didn't think were relevant. Someone edited it, whatever the press was. Shambhala, I think, is the Shambhala Dragon is the press. They edited all that stuff, a lot of stuff out of it. So I realized that's why it was confusing. It was confusing to me too from reading the edited version of it, because it seemed like he'd already gone through his negative awakening, and then now it's a negative. Now he's having it didn't make any sense, and I feel like that's because of the editing. But interestingly, after this whole that interview with JJ and everything, I'm reading Living with Kundalini, and I came upon the chapter where he talks about that. And it is clear, reading it in there, the sequence of events, that after his initial awakening, he has a negative experience, and then, goes through, and he resolved that one with the belief of that there's separate, these two extra channels in the spine, on either side of the spine, and his Kundalini force had been in one and it needed to get pushed through the other. And so he does some meditation, visualization type things, and he resolved the situation that way. And he got back to normal, and he's then experiencing in a peaceful, euphoric manner this new enhancement to his perspective and his being, which makes more sense to me. And he, at that point, moved his diet to totally vegan. That's when he moved his diet to totally vegan. And he'd made a statement earlier in the book that he occasionally would have some meat. He made that statement about how he'd occasionally have meat. And it's interesting, he notes that even then, the neighborhood he's in is filled with people who are meat Nazis, vegan Nazis, basically, waggling their finger at you. So he makes a note of that. It's a great, it's always kind of a good special, good find if you have an opportunity to get a little bit of meat every day. And I will note that the same culture was very much in poverty at the time, but that's a conversation for another time. The connection between radical veganism and economic disparity, I'll cover that in another episode. But from Gopi's point of view, he stopped eating meat after awakening his Kundalini and getting it all under control and thinking everything was fine, and apparently thinking that a pure vegan diet is the way to go with this. And then it was a few months after that, or maybe a year after that, I can't remember, some amount of time after that, that during his meditation he had another big headache. I'm just going to say it's like something similar to a migraine headache, although he describes it very very colorfully, and he thought that he'd over meditated, again. And so then he goes into an even deeper negative spiral. The name of the chapter, I can't remember the name of the chapter, but it's something very morose, like how I almost ended my life. And he seriously does. He talks about how bad it was, and his family, he was out of town at the time, and then he couldn't move, and then his family came, and he was like, he thought he was going to die because he was so weak and couldn't hold down any food. He couldn't take food, which was like, I mean, he's just sticking to rice and milk, and he couldn't take any food from his vegan diet. And then he has a dream one night that some apparition or mystical spirit is telling him you should eat some meat. So he got up in the next day. He said, hey, can I have a little bit of meat? And they gave him some meat, and that fixed it. And he was right as rain. And that's, this is what's interesting about Gopi's story, and really a lot of other stories that I've heard, is that there's a lot of room where people will describe an experience, and there's a lot of subjective leeway, that people will make it very colorful or relate it to their previous dreams and fancies and stuff like that. But then we come back to really specific things that are practical results from this, and he says that ever since then he got that meat back on, and he realized that his diet has to be maintained in a complete moderation, with the Kundalini, with the sacred fire, as he calls it, his words, that there's some communication from there about what is correct. And I really resonated with that. That became my experience in many ways a couple of years back, and I regimented my diet to initially a high keto diet, and started seeing these health problems from ulcerative colitis that had plagued me for years just started to vanish as a result of it. And it was something that I just naturally did after a certain point, after something happened. And it, and I don't want to say that everyone's experience is going to be that meat is the key for everyone's experience, because maybe it's not, and maybe it'll change for me sometime. But I do think there's certainly a lot of people in the whole Kundalini scene that are vegetarian vegans and are going to push for that. And again, like I said in another podcast, there's not really any medical or scientific evidence that veganism is a better diet, but it is being pushed, I think, in many ways more for political reasons than it is for health reasons. So I take a little affirmation from that the sacred fire has confirmed, in some sense, that meat is needed, and that by having meat, we're acting in consistency with truth. And I can tell, like talking to JJ and some people who are going through this process or have gone through this process, that it, you know, when they see me talk about eating meat, it just kind of blows their mind, because it's just become like a truism. I'm just going to say for the baby boomer generation, who ends up following any kind of like Eastern thing, that vegan diet is a part of it, and you either go vegan or else you feel guilty about not going vegan. And my experience is that that's just that's an archaic way of thinking. It's an archaic way of thinking about it. It's an unnatural way of thinking about it. I think it's clearly part of the nature of humankind that they eat meat. But that's probably enough for now. Maybe I'll come back and add more later. But until next time, stay true, go against the grain, and keep the dark fires burning. So until next time, stay true, go against the grain, and keep the dark fires burning.